Ptāñkät Kuchean Andi, Kāsu Pañäktentse nāmye, Andi, Kartse tuwe. Hello, my name is Andy. How are you? Let's talk about the Tocharian languages.
Kuchean.
The Tocharian languages form an independent, early branching member of the Indo-European family, spoken until roughly the end of the first millennium CE in the oasis city-states of the Tarim Basin, in modern-day Xinjiang. Two are securely attested: Tocharian A, or Agnean or East Tocharian, natively called as Arshi, centered on Karashar and Turfan, and Tocharian B, also called Kuchean or West Tocharian, and natively called as Kuchean, spread more widely from Turfan to Tumshuk. The consensus is that A and B are two distinct, mutually unintelligible languages, not dialects, implying Proto Tocharian split centuries before the texts. Tocharian A appears to have become a largely liturgical language, while Tocharian B remains a living vernacular. A possible third language, Tocharian C, was once proposed on the basis of unusual foreign words and names in some 3rd century documents from the southern Tarim Basin. This idea has now been largely rejected. A claimed decipherment of such a language was found to be deeply flawed, and the supposedly Tocharian words turned out to be from other languages or simply misreadings. Tocharian is famously a centum language. The word 100 in Tocharian A is kunt, while for the Tocharian B is kante, similar to the Latin word centum, sitting at the eastern edge of the Indo-European world, which dismantled the simple centum-satem geographic divide. Other features: the merger of the 3 Proto Indo-European stop series into one voiceless series, pa, ta, ka, a restructured, partly agglutinative case system, inherited primary cases plus secondary suffixal cases, retention of the dual, and a conservative verb. It is widely held to be the second branch to split from Proto Indo-European, after Anatolian, and some scholars have suggested that its unusual structural features may stem from a Uralic substrate. Both languages were written in North Turkestan Brahmi, an Indic-derived Abugida. The Tocharian languages are known almost entirely from manuscripts recovered during a series of rival early 20th century expeditions to Chinese Turkestan, led by German, French, British, Russian, and Japanese teams between roughly 1902 and 1914. The dry climate of the Tarim Basin preserved these manuscripts in ruined monasteries and caves, and in 1908, Emil Zieg and Wilhelm Ziegling identified them as a new Indo-European branch, dividing them into Group A and Group B. The language was that of Buddhist Silk Road oasis kingdoms along the northern rim of the basin, above all, Kucha, Agni or Karashar, and Turfan, which flourished from roughly the 4th to the 10th century CE. The oldest Tocharian B manuscripts now dated to the 5th or even late 4th century, making them contemporary with Gothic. City-states perpetually caught between steppe confederations and Chinese empires, with the Tang establishing a protectorate over Kucha in 658. How and when Indo-European speech first reached this region is bound up with the much-debated question of the Tarim Basin mummies, naturally desiccated remains from sites such as Shaohe, Kumogo, and Lowland, the oldest dating to 2100 to 1700 BCE, famous for their Western or Europoid features, fair or reddish hair, and tartan-like woolen textiles. For a long time, scholars thought these mummies were linked to the Tocharians, believing they came from a Bronze Age people who migrated east from the Eurasian steppe around 3000 BCE. But a 2021 DNA study showed the earliest mummies were not migrants at all. They were a local population that had lived in isolation, with ancestry mostly from ancient North Eurasian and Northeast Asian peoples, and no trace of steppe origins. since about 2,000 years separate these Bronze Age people from the first written Tocharian. They can no longer be treated as the same group, though the language itself may still have arrived later from the neighboring region to the north. The languages eventually disappeared through Turkicization, when the Uyghur Khaganate fell in 840 CE. Uyghur refugees moved south and established the kingdom of Kocho near Turfan, slowly absorbing and assimilating the local Indo-European population. As a result, Tocharian declined as an everyday spoken language during the 9th to 10th centuries, lingering only a little longer as a language of liturgy and translation. The people who spoke these languages never called themselves Tocharians. They had their own names, with Tocharian B speakers calling their language Kuchean or Kuchean, and Tocharian A speakers using Arshi after the region of Agni or Karashar. The name Tocharian is now recognized as a mistake, the so-called Tocharian problem. A researcher coined it in 1907 from an old note in a Uyghur text mentioning a language called Tochre, which linked to an ancient people known from classical sources as the Tokharoi. But those Tokharoi, usually identified with the founders of the Kuchean Empire in what is now Afghanistan, actually spoke an Eastern Iranian language, unrelated to the languages of the Tarim Basin, so the name mixes up two entirely different peoples. An old supporting clue, a bilingual text that seemed to equate a word for Kuchean, has since been disproven, as the word simply means a kind of fragrant clay. The label has stuck mostly out of habit, though some scholars now prefer the speakers' own names or neutral terms like the Tarim languages. As for the people themselves, donor portraits painted in the Buddhist caves near Kucha show light-skinned figures, sometimes with reddish or fair hair and light eyes, leading one art historian to describe them as European rather than Mongol in appearance, though some of the robed figures may actually depict other Central Asian groups rather than Tocharians. Socially, the speakers were settled-down dwellers in Buddhist oasis kingdoms, ruled by local royal families. Kucha was governed by the Bai family, living by irrigated farming, trade, and the monastic economy, a settled way of life completely unlike that of the nomadic, Iranian-speaking Tokharoi, with whom they share nothing but an accidental name. Tocharian culture was overwhelmingly Buddhist, and the corpus is dominated by religious literature, translations of Sanskrit sutras, Vinaya, Avadanas, and Jatakas, and the celebrated Maitreya Samiti Nartaka, a long Tocharian A drama on the future Buddha Maitreya. The Kucha region mainly followed the Sarvastivada school, and Kuchean monks were key transmitters of Buddhism to China. Above all, Kumarajiva, from 344 to 413, the son of a Kuchean princess, who became one of history's greatest translators of Buddhist texts into Chinese. The dry climate also preserved a vivid secular records, almost all in Tocharian B, monastery accounts, commercial documents, Silk Road caravan passes, medical and magical texts, and a famous fragmentary love poem declaring that no being bearing the name human was ever dearer to the speaker. Artistically, the Tocharian world survives in the Buddhist cave complexes of Kucha. Above all, the Qizil caves, consisting of 236 cave temples, earliest murals from 300 CE, whose narrative scenes and richly dressed, sometimes Tocharian-labeled donor portraits, fuse Indian, Iranian, and Central Asian styles. Kucha was especially renowned for music and dance. Kuchean, or Chiotsu music, formed one of the standard genres of the Sui Tang court repertoire. The 6th century Kuchean music, Sujiwa, is credited with transmitting a 7-mode scale system to the Chinese courts, and the Kuchean pipa became central to Tang court music. Reliquaries, woolen garments, and murals of masked musicians, dancers, and harpists confirm a wealthy cosmopolitan society at the Eurasian crossroads. In the next part, Let's listen to the beautiful sounds of their language. Numbers.
Sus, o, tre, stur, pânj, shik, shpët, okët, një, shik, she, wi, trej, shtuer, pish, shkës, shukt, okt, një, shik.
Vocabulary.
Njësh, njuk, një, tu, tni, wës, yës, sës, sas, sëm, sam, njësh, njësh, një, tuwe, tënj, wes, yes, se, sa, su, sau, kus, shni, alëk, pachar, machar, prachar, shër, se, qkachar, shin, kuse, shënj, ëljek, pachar, machar, prochar, sher, soj, tkachar, shënë, arinç, ëk, këm, këntu, kënwen, pe, ai, prëtsëk, isar, akër, ërënqe, ek, keme, këntuo, keni, pëje, ajo, prëtsako, yësër, ëkrunë, wër, por, tkën, kon, mënj, wënt, juk, kol, ku, lëks, wër, puër, ken, këun, menje, jente, yëkwe, kew, ku, lëks, wilkwe, kënt, nës, kna, për, i, këm, kum, e, yë, we, trënk, wilkwe, kënte, nes, kna, për, i, këm, ëj, jam, we, wenj, krios, yok, shu, pëk, lëk, nkët, wil, njom, mët, kukël, klios, yok, shu, pëk, lka, njëkte, welo, njem, mit, kokële, rëke, pëlcëk, puk, Ptāñkät, mërkëmpël, ljelpu, arkishoshi, kliom, shamën, këshi, reki, pëlsko, po, Pañäktentse, pelëkne, jamor, shaishe, kliomo, shëmëne, këshi, cërp, potëshpër, qmol, bodhisattu, klu, chok, ri, cilp, Pañäktentse, qmel, bodhisattve, klu, chok, rije, shakuse, luake, shipankinç, ërkënt, çak, tëu, shënk, qane, ecue, enquo, kerqëpo, erkent, cak, onkornjo.
Sample text.
Okët të manpukla, urësë shishollën, wipashinyoma, Ptāñkät, sëm këshiashanik, të manjo wilks pukli, puttishpërn klipat, shtuart të man pën wilks pukla, puttishpërshinas, ulesënt uleshat, të man shik wilks pukla, sholjal jupurish, kësalunejën klk, ok të mane pikwala, onël mens sjawlne, wipashinyamsa, Pañäktentse, su këshiashanike, të mane një jeltse, pikwaleshe, Pañäktentse këlpate, shtuer të mane pishjeltse, pikwala, Pañäktentse ulente ulasate. Tmaneshka sjoltse pikwala. Shaulil pormen käṣṣiṃ kala. Manje chuanun. Hjomnjomunolme. Laretak. Maren postin chua. Lare muskaterni. Tishilarune. Tishiartune. Pilke kultur. Hjoleshilshe. Maten stalle. Hjolvernjoi. Manje chisenosh. Hjomnjem unolme. Lare taka. Mare postan chisa. Lare muskaterni. Tishe larumne. Tishe artanje. Pelke kultur. Hjolmpeshe. Maten stalle hjolvernjoi.